Hello everyone, and welcome to the Old Ways for the New Age podcast, where we are embracing ancient ways of being and opening our hearts to the magic of everyday life. I am your host Kristy, founder of Bohemian Farmhouse and Midnight Kid. In this show, we will discuss topics like living slowly with ritual and with reverence for the earth and our bodies, herbal wisdom and plant spirit stories. Join us as we romance the ordinary, re-enchant our own lives with plant magic, and get ourselves back to the garden. Hi everyone, welcome to the Old Ways for the New Age podcast. It is hot today. Where I live on the east coast of Australia in Queensland, it is 31 degrees today. I've been so looking forward to the heat, and I finally have it. It is finally here. I'm so happy, and it's going to be beautiful weather for the next 2 to 3 days, so looking forward to it. If you listen on to the episode that we have today, all about Astro Herbalism in Scorpio season with Hannah, we have a little chat at the start about the storm that came through night before last. And whenever we have a storm with lightning and thunder, afterwards everything is just so verdant and so green and so lush. It's so vividly green outside right now. It's beautiful. And the jacarandas are flowering and the butterflies are out flitting here and there. I drive my car down the mountain and there's just clouds of butterflies going over my car. It's just beautiful. I love it. I love this time of year. It feels like Christmas. So today we have, as I mentioned already, another episode on Astro Herbalism, specifically for Scorpio season. Scorpio season started on the 23rd, I believe, of this month. And we had the Scorpio new moon on Tuesday, which was last night. So in this installment of our Astro Herbalism series with Hannah, for Scorpio season, of course, we talk a little bit about the mythology behind Scorpio, the ruling planet, and we go through our picks of herbs that we would use as either guardian or remedial herbs for Scorpio season. I really enjoyed this conversation with Anna, and I hope you will too. As always, thank you so much for following and listening. Would really love a rating or review if you have time, and a little follow over on our Instagram. We always share behind the scenes and pictures and videos of things that we talk about here on the podcast over on Instagram as well. So definitely go have a look. And thank you so much for listening. Here is the episode with Hannah. Hey Hannah, how you doing?
Hi, Kristy. I'm well. How are you?
Good. So we're
Good.
just about to go into eclipse season as well as Scorpio season. I think I'm actually feeling it. Did you hear the storm last night?
Yes, it actually woke me up, which is very difficult for a storm to do. It was quite intense.
Yeah, we actually had hail on our roof right at the
Oh,
start.
wow.
Yeah, and our dogs really panic, especially the big one. She really panics with lightning and thunder. Rain doesn't
Oh,
bother her, but yeah, and it's definitely the lightning. So if she's in a dark room, she'll be a bit happier. So we wake up to her kind of getting a bit upset before the storm wakes us up.
poor little thing.
Yeah, but she was
That's not
okay.
nice.
We tucked her in. She was all right.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting season at the moment, I think.
And we've got the new moon as well. Is that tonight? Hang on, let me check my little graph. What date is it? Yeah, tonight.
25th, new moon.
So, yes, so we have the new moon tonight in Scorpio.
Yeah, that should be an interesting one. Scorpio in general is an interesting season, I think, like an interesting sign astrologically.
I agree. It's one of those ones where it's unexpected because I always thought Scorpio was more fire. And my little brother is a Scorpio, and he
Oh.
definitely had that fiery kind of temper growing up. And so I always just associated it with fire. And then when I learned that it was water, I was like, oh, okay. Wow.
I
Interesting.
think you and I have spoken before, absolutely, that I always thought that Scorpio was fire growing up. It has that fiery nature to it. And upon a bit more digging, I now kind of understand why there is that fire aspect to it. But yes, definitely it is the more fiery of the water signs.
And its symbol is the scorpion. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it's shown through the scorpion sting, that sort of fire element, and that whole like
Mm.
burning kind of feature of it. I also learned that scorpions shed as well, and I feel like that's a really important part
Oh,
of their symbology too. They shed their skin, and
absolutely.
it mirrors the fire, sort of like phoenix rising from the ashes when you shed your skin as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
a new life kind of emerging from the fire. So that's interesting too, that it's also mirrored in that as well. So where does the water come in? Where's the water?
Well, it is interesting. So Scorpio is, associated with Pluto, and Pluto is connected to Hades, lord of the Greek underworld. And it rules unconscious depths as well. So I think that depth that is very connected to emotion, but it's interesting because Hades has been seen to connect and bring in instinctual drives and emotional attachments and compulsive obsessive tendencies from past lives. So it is quite an emotional sign, but all the Scorpios that I know have a really difficult time actually sharing their emotions with other people or even with themselves. It's this, yeah, like they're deeply emotional people, but they
Mm,
don't want to access that emotion a lot of the time. I guess it depends on where they are in their journey and the rest of their chart.
Yes, my brother is very, very private and he doesn't share a
Mm.
lot. And I think there's also an element of, he kind of feels like there should be some form of like telepathic understanding of, if
Mm.
you're in the inner circle, you should just know how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that comes up a lot with him in particular. He just sort of like, well, you should know how I feel because you know me, without him actually communicating that emotion. You know what is actually kind of true because we do.
Yeah.
We do get it. So
And
it kind of
also,
calm.
Scorpio it rules the occult. So it also makes sense that like they rule the mystical, the deep, the things that are unseen. So it makes sense that they'd almost have that. They tend to be very esoteric people deep down, whether they kind of project that or not. I mean, again, most of the Scorpios that I personally know very much are loud and proud about their spirituality, but you know, I'm not sure about your brother, but there is that layer of like energetic exchange and expectation of things just naturally, like something like telepathy or communication in that way would just kind of be expected on like a base level.
I also wanted to just digress really quickly and talk about elements too,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a really good opportunity, being the fact that we had that initial, like, are they fire? Are they water? So, talking about elements, there's the four elements: earth, fire, air, and earth. Did I say earth twice then? Earth,
Yeah.
fire,
Yes. Earth, air, fire, water.
earth, air, earth, air, fire, water. And each one kind of represents something different. And obviously, water is just what you were saying, that very like deep, it's more emotional, and you'll find that mirrored through the signs that are ruled by that element. So
Mm-hmm.
when you go through the elements, earth is, it's quite obvious, it's very grounded. It's more, I guess, to do with a way of being. And
Mm-hmm.
air is more about that sort of communication, thought. It's more about sort of
The
realm.
intellectual.
Yeah, the intellectual. And water is that, like we said, emotional. And fire is more that sort of like doing. And I once
Mm.
heard actually that we all live in a kind of fire dominated society.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
it's all,
absolutely.
yeah, it's all about that, the hustle, the doing, the striving, the achieving, the drive. And
Mm-hmm.
growing up, I feel like if you're not a fire sign, then you can often feel like you have to feel like you don't belong, or the way that you are is not the the way that you need to show up in the world in order to thrive in this world,
Mm.
So I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
a really important piece. And also the fact that with the elements are really important when working with herbs and constitution.
Definitely.
If you've got a bit too much warmth, then you would, like fire, then you would use a watery herb to sort of like cool things down. Do you want to talk a little bit
Yes.
about that as well? Like that whole like constitutional elemental, because I feel like that's a really important piece for people to understand Astro Herbalism.
Yeah, it's a big topic. The energetics. So, yeah, obviously, so let's say we're looking at Scorpio as an example because that's this podcast episode. You'd be looking, well, I guess let's also touch for 1 second, if you don't mind me touching on the Mars Pluto Scorpio triangle here.
Yeah,
Because yeah,
definitely.
a lot of people are associating and do associate Mars with Scorpio as well. So that also brings in a heating element to it, although Mars is not going to be the same driving force and like fiery like element that you're going to get with Aries, for example. Aries is very yang, very Mars, very hot, and that's in the forefront. Whereas with Scorpio, it's far more subtle. Scorpio is known as the sign of alchemical transformation, which is really like a beautiful thing to say. And so,
Mm.
yeah, it really does represent death. It's the eighth house. So, the house of death, transformation, rebirth, sex, money, the occult. And when I say money, specifically other people's money. But Mars shows up in a more subtle way. And it can actually, if used and harnessed properly, and it also depends on the aspects, which is a whole other story, but the aspects of Mars in their chart, but can lead to really big breakthroughs in a Scorpio's life throughout this life and the time in this life. So it can be that driving force. So they have a little bit more of that drive and forwardness, I guess, than other water signs. So that's just like an element to look at. But with the energetics of herbs, if someone, for example, most people will know people who can't handle ginger. I like to use ginger as an example. My mum is one of those people, can't do chili, can't do ginger, runs hot. If she was in a room and she had a jacket on, she'd instantly have to take it off. So she is a hot constitution. And so we wouldn't want to go and add a whole bunch of ginger in because that wouldn't suit her as an individual. It would make her far too hot. It wouldn't work with her constitution. So yeah, we would want to use other more cooling herbs with her. And so that's just like a very small example of trying to get the gist of what that would look like. With Scorpio, it tends to be a damp stagnation tissue state. So yeah, you would, even though they traditionally ruled by Mars, you would add in, if someone's having stagnation, for example, of Scorpio rules the reproductive organs. So let's say somebody's having some issues with their period and their menstrual cycle. You would want to warm the area up. You'd want to increase circulation. So you'd be using warming and circulation enhancing herbs to do that. You wouldn't be using cold herbs because that would just perpetuate the stagnation. And you wouldn't want to use wet herbs because that would perpetuate the dampness. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I feel as though it's really important to learn these plants and what they do and their qualities like that. But it's also important to look at the way that they grow
Mm-hmm.
and to sort of determine what they do with the body as well. So, obviously, if you take ginger and you feel that warming quality that it has, instantly you know that it's a warming herb, right? But you can also look at the way that plants grow. So, for example, I like to look at marshmallow and the way that it grows. It likes a damp root, and it also has like this sort of like gelatinous kind of quality, like it feels like it's really juicy.
Mucilage.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's how it's going to work with the body. It's going to increase that sort of moistening, cooling property.
Yeah, I think learning the, I guess, energetics and this style of herbalism is very experiential. So
Mm.
you know, you can really tell a lot of this stuff through experiencing the plant fresh, dried, seeing it grow, getting really connected, because nothing can replace your firsthand experience with a herb. The most amount of book learning in the world won't give you the same experience as actually growing something and seeing how it works, tasting it fresh, provided it's safe to do so. Let's not go chomping down on fresh elderberries, please. Book learning is helpful, but the only reason we need this kind of book learning is because we've lost that apprenticeship style learning, you know, where you would go and you would work with a herbalist for a period of time, maybe even live with them, work on their farm, learn from them in that way. And that person would guide you about the kind of nuanced do's and don'ts, like don't eat fresh elderberries.
Yes. And also the family knowledge that would be passed down.
For sure.
And definitely specific to the kind of herbs and plants that would grow in your immediate area where you lived.
Having said that, though, elderberry is so easy to grow. So you could grow it. You could see how much sun it likes. See what time of year the berries come out. Do they need, you know, a lot of heat to produce more berries? Do they need a lot of cool? Do they need, you know, some plants need a frost to really produce well. So, yeah, it goes back to that firsthand experience if you can get it, or if you're not in a place where you could experience those things firsthand, finding a place you could visit, finding a friend who grows the herbs and ask them questions, things like that.
And I really love the approach of that sort of childlike experimenting with plants. So asking their permission first, of course, before you do this. But I mean, I remember doing this as a child heaps, just sort of like taking a leaf and pulling it apart, learning like the way that it's structured, learning what kind of stuff oozes out. You know, this is something that we do as kids. It's part of play. It's part of learning. It's almost instinctual. We do this sort of thing. And I watch my own kids do that as well. My daughter in particular, she would spend hours, and she's nearly 11 and she still does it, but would spend hours as a child just going and picking all different leaves, pulling them apart, mushing them up, seeing what happens when she mixes them with water. You know, just that sort of like, just really like pulling things apart and getting really detailed with it and just playing around like that.
Yeah, this is a total segue, but I was speaking to someone recently about Rudolf Steiner and his principles on why, you know, this is actually, we're talking about Saturn and the 7-year Saturn cycles, but that's why he believed that children shouldn't start formal learning until age 7. So that's just after their first Saturn cycle or transit, because they're still developing and still experiencing things, and things should be color and taste and texture and that kind of experience, because it's so incredibly valuable to your critical thinking, to your development and who you're going to be as an adult. Because I feel like so many of us lose that. Like, it's very easy to just get caught up in life and not make the time to go and play with some plants outside, you know, but it's important, and it can be a really crucial part of herbalism.
And I think that's also a way of us connecting to some sort of deeper instinctual cellular knowing by doing those sort of things. And as soon as we head into a more sort of academic, book focused, school based learning, we lose that more instinctual connection to the stuff that we just know on a really deep level. And that's
which is
part of
perfect for
remembering.
Scorpio.
Yes, it is. It's
The
perfect.
instinctual drive. Like, Scorpio
Yeah.
is so led by their instincts, their gut feelings. Yeah, really cool. It's come full circle.
It has come full circle. I mean, and that's what I always say, you know, like I love conversations that spiral and circle like that. The patterns you can find in a discussion like that is so cool.
Definitely. So yeah, like the herbs, you had a list of herbs for Scorpio.
So the herbs that I found for Scorpio, the absolute main one is nettle. And I found that one in not only the Guardian herb list, but the remedy herb list. And I actually think I've kind of nailed my understanding of a remedy herb and a guardian herb now. The way that I've been able to wrap my mind around it is that a guardian herb is, okay, now it's going to like not come out of my mouth.
The spotlight's on you. It's too much pressure.
Okay, so a guardian herb is the herb that sort of embodies the spirit of sign, of the astrological
Mhm.
sign or the planet. So you'll find qualities mirrored in the guardian herb, whereas a remedial
Mhm.
herb is when that sign is kind of out of balance. So they're in
Mhm.
a more negative state. They need to remedy that. So they need to bring more of those sort of qualities
Mm.
in to sort of get themselves back up to balance. And that's why you can find a herb in both, like for
Mhm.
example, nettle is a guardian and a remedial herb under the sign of Scorpio. So
Mm.
it
Because
does
that would be
both.
like a constitutional remedy for that sign.
Yes. So I've wrapped my mind around it now. I kind of get it.
You
Yeah.
know what? I actually see a big parallel between that and flower essences. So,
Mm.
flower essences, we have like a positive and a negative state. At least with Grauhaven, there's a positive and a negative state. And actually, homeopathy deals with this a little bit as well. So, person who would be constitutionally or in a space of that flower, when somebody is expressing themselves, living their best lives, doing everything to support themselves, they would be the positive state, which would be the guardian herb. And then when they're out of step with themselves, if they're self-sabotaging, if they are in a dark place, if they're just not fully fulfilled, fully expressed, they would be experiencing symptoms and, I guess, side effects that would be related to the negative state. And so that would be the remedial herb.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. So in the case of like a Scorpio, for example, if they are in a imbalanced or weakened state, from what I can tell, they would need to focus on things like detoxifying, promoting
Mm-hmm.
elimination, and also warming their constitution up. So
Yeah, and
you would
improving
approach a
circulation.
remedial herb. Yeah. And so then you would use one of the remedy herbs in that case.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've got it.
And their body systems too. So like the things that may be affected or are like, Scorpio rules. I haven't explicitly said all of it, but basically Scorpio rules the pelvis and the sex organs, and to an extent, I would say the circulatory system as well. So you may also experience issues in those areas if you were out of alignment as a Scorpio. So you would have your period would be late, or you'd have really bad cramps that month, or maybe you get a UTI or something like that. And you would then use those herbs associated with Scorpio to help remedy that. And nettle's so beautiful. Nettle's one of my favorites. So mineral rich, so incredible for the nervous system as well, which I know has a little bit to do with Scorpio too. But yeah, yeah, I feel like ginger should be on this list for
Yeah.
Scorpio.
Yeah. I actually did have ginger on the list. Let me go through my list. So,
Yes, let's go through the list. We haven't done that yet.
all right. So I've actually got as guardian herbs, and this is sort of also herbs that you would use not internally, like maybe you just want to use the energy and the
Mhm.
spirit of the plant because some of these
Ceremonial.
are poisonous, which suits
Yeah,
Scorpio
okay.
perfectly.
Yes.
So belladonna,
Mm.
mandrake, hemlock. So
Ooh,
all
I
of
love
those
it.
I feel like have that sort of mysterious, deep occult kind of
Mm,
vibe.
totally.
Ginger, and then moving on from those, ginger, ginseng, hibiscus,
Hmm.
and nettle,
Hmm.
and Queen Anne's lace.
Beautiful. Some of the ones that I had that I don't think were on your list were wormwood was a big one that came up. Oregon grape, barberry, and rosemary.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think those. And oats as well was a big one that was coming up, which kind of, yeah, hinted at that nervous system involvement as well. Even kava kava was on a list that I found online, was kava kava. So again, that kind of, and hops, like that nervous system picture as a
Mm.
component. Some other keywords I found for Scorpio that I think are really good to look at with herbs as well is nocturnal, lunar, and funerary,
Mm.
which I really liked the sound of. But the funerary is hinting at that death aspect. And you know, my understanding of Scorpio, it's again very associated with the underworld. And as a Scorpio, you would be constantly taking journeys to the underworld and back up. So, that might look like quite turbulent thing, like big experiences that you would have to integrate, and maybe even experiences with the other worlds, like otherworldly experiences or experiences with spirits and things like that. So the herbs that you came up with, I think, really suit that as well in particular.
I actually feel as well that that might be the scorpion shedding the skin, that
Mm.
that death, rebirth, visiting the underworld,
Mm-hmm.
coming back slightly changed.
For sure. Yeah, Scorpio. And another thing that came up for me thinking about Scorpio is that it's obviously the perfect time of year for Scorpio, because when you think about what's happening with the wheel of the year and the seasons, where particularly this year, but that our experiences in the last few weeks, but the thinning of the veil. So in the northern hemisphere, Scorpio season is coming up on Halloween, which is All Hallows Eve, Samhain. It's the point between the end of autumn, early winter, sorry. So it's that perfect time for that death and rebirth, even when you're considering the death of the god and the rebirth of the god, if you're getting into the Celtic side of it. But yeah, I feel like this is the perfect time. And even in the southern hemisphere, we're still looking at that thin veil coming up on Beltane. So yeah, a lot of in between, a lot of liminal space, a lot of connection with other realms, I suppose you could put it.
Yes, I love that. And I actually really enjoy this is one of those rare times when I actually really enjoy having a calendar celebrating Halloween and then the seasonal calendar celebrating Beltane, because I really like, I mean, as much as I like my earthy harvest kind of aesthetic, and this is all the leave-in parts of me coming out right now. I also like to bring in the beautiful flowers and all the things that represent Beltane. So
Mm. And for us, like having my husband be from the Northern Hemisphere, we do tend to celebrate both the same time. So I will have my spring decor out and spring altar spaces set up. But then for that day, I will have both. I will incorporate the dark, the esoteric, the Samhain kind of based elements to my altar spaces, as well as the spring, which is kind of unconventional, but it works for me and I've done it for many years now. So yeah, it makes sense in general. Both are times where the veil is thin.
I love that you said
Mm.
this works for me. Figure out what works for you and stick with that. Okay, so let's circle back to herbs. So my pick is nettle. That's my like the main one. I feel like the symbology of Scorpio is kind of embodied in this plant. The fact that it has the stings is
Mm-hmm.
very reminiscent of the sting of the scorpion.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, in
Yeah.
my little book, I'll just read out the like first sentence in my the complete book of herbs and spices, the book that I found at my grandma's, or my mum found at my grandma's recently. And it's funny because the actual page that nettle sits on has this skeleton of a leaf sitting in there pressed, and it must be really, really old because it's just the skeleton of the leaf left, and it's really cool. I'll share a picture of it on Instagram, I think.
That would be very
Okay.
cool.
Okay, so the sentence is, it is a pity that the stinging nettle is condemned as a troublesome weed because of its stubborn tenacity to live in the most unwelcome places.
Mm.
I really feel like that has a very scorpion vibe to it as well.
Mm. And I did some thinking on because like to just ponder these things. So I was thinking about nettle before we talked and thinking about how it would relate to Scorpio. And yes, aside from just this, like the fact that in itself it stings like the scorpion, um, something came up in my reading about Scorpio being associated with stings and bites, probably because of that aspect, which is really, yeah, very interesting. Because, also another aspect of the nettle sting is that it's very beneficial.
It
So
is.
the
Yes.
sting isn't a negative thing, it's uncomfortable. And discomfort is probably also partly a Scorpio thing of that breaking apart to come back together, journeying down to the underworld, dying and then rebirthing is not a comfortable experience, but it's such a transformational healing experience, or can be. And nettle's just like that. You sting yourself with nettle and it can help to treat arthritis, and it brings blood back to the area, increases circulation. It really is quite an archetypal herb for this.
I think it was the Roman soldiers. So when they invaded England, they heard that it was a really cold climate. So they brought nettles with them so that they could whip the bunches of nettles over their skin to warm themselves up.
That makes a lot of sense, but also, again, very uncomfortable.
Kind
You'd
of
think
crazy.
you could just find another jumper, but yes. Seems like the hard way around it.
And also, I love the fact that you can use the fibers from a nettle plant to actually spin, which I've done before. I've used my spinning wheel to actually spin fibers of nettle into a twine, and it's one of the strongest twines that you'll ever get. And
So cool.
And yeah, you can create cloth as well from nettle.
Yeah, nettle is kind of like hemp in that way. It's so useful, so nutritious, so useful in other ways too. Well, I think I've got two that I am really loving for this season. One is rosemary, but rosemary is one of my all-time favorites anyway. But rosemary is so incredible for circulation. It's really supportive of the liver, increases detoxification through the liver, because also with detoxification being a goal of Scorpio season, you would be looking at things that support the liver. So, rosemary is incredible for that. It also increases microcirculation in particular. So, and it can help to enhance brain function. And it's an amazing herb. And actually would be perfect for the rosemary refocus tonic blend this time of year, I think, too, for this season. Rosemary is a favorite. And it's used a lot in hormonal conditions as well, because it helps with estrogen metabolism. But anyway, getting too deep into that one. But I also love oat, just in general. Again, it's just like another one of my favorites. It's just so nourishing, building, supportive. I just love it. It's just perfect for honestly any season.
I love oats too. I feel like that's one of the best things I've ever taken for my nervous system.
Kristy knows I use oats in everything. Pretty much every mix, I use oats. And oat store in so many of my teas as well. It's just, yeah, it's an amazing plant to have access to, and it's just from oats. It's so cool.
It is pretty cool. What would your pick be for a flower essence for Scorpio season?
So I actually spoke to Jerry from Growhaven. So I use predominantly the Growhaven essences. They're grown up here on the mountain and made up here on the mountain. And yeah, Jerry's story is amazing. But she recommends blue ginger for this Scorpio season. And blue ginger is associated with death and rebirth. So I think that's one of the major reasons why she's recommended blue ginger. But also, it is warming. It has that slight Mars aspect to it. It's used for psychic development and spiritual advancement. So, meditating with the blue ginger on your third eye and the angel trumpet on your crown is really amazing for doing that more spiritual, esoteric work, which I think is really cool for this season as well. So, yeah, that would be my pick, blue ginger. Jerry's pick, blue ginger.
Yes, I love that. And my pick would be holly, mainly dealing with the themes of anger, jealousy, and suspicion. So I guess that would be more if you were sort of like in your not self theme, just helping to sort of deal with those things, those issues as they come up. Specifically jealousy. And I feel like jealousy comes up a lot in Scorpio season, and it probably will come up a lot now during the eclipse season as well, and all the things that are going on astrologically right now. And I just want to preface by saying that I don't think jealousy is necessarily a bad thing. I think when you are jealous of someone or something, it's more of an indicator that this is something that you want or aspire or need, and using it more as like a marker so that we can actually get more into an authentic self is
and also
how I would
possibly
jealousy,
like a driving force as well, like to get motivated, like transmute it into a positive thing. Like
exactly.
I have now got the drive. I know, yeah, that marker point. Oh, that did something in my brain or in my heart, and now I know that that's something I need to pay attention to, and I can then transmute that energy from jealousy into motivation.
And if it's a person that you're jealous of, then thinking more of them along the lines of being expanders. So expanding your perception into this is actually something that I want to go after and have for myself. And looking at it that way instead of just kind of going, ooh, and having the negative emotions that come up.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Well, it's been really fun talking about Scorpio season.
Oh, I really enjoyed that. That was good. It's great chatting.
Yeah, it was really fun. Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here and for listening. I know your time is sacred and special, and I really appreciate you spending yours with me. Thank you, and until next time, bye.